Hi, everyone. We're going to give about a 2-minute warning and then we'll come back together. Okay, everyone. If some of you have just joined us, so I did put the link to the article that we're going to be discussing today. To kind of frame our discussion, we want to look at the danger of a single story because we're focusing on learner analysis part of the instructional design model. So we have a very short 3-minute video that we're going to play for you that kind of frames what we're talking about with the danger of a single story. And then we'll move into our interactive discussion part. So Tyler's going to play that video for us.
I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me, as an African, was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world, and it is nkali. It's a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are defined by the principle of nkali. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and to start with secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state and not with the colonial creation of the African state, and you have an entirely different story.
Okay. And she goes on to say it's about a 19-minute talk, so we couldn't unfortunately watch the entire thing. But she goes on to say that the danger of a single story is not that it's necessarily wrong, it's that it's incomplete. And so that's her kind of her hook at the end, is that the importance of having a complete picture, which we felt was appropriate when we were talking about the learner analysis phase of the instructional design models. So we do have a Padlet to kind of guide our conversations today. So we would invite you to join that. Yes, well, we can put a link for the entire video. It's fantastic, by the way. I use it every semester, no matter what class I'm teaching. I find some way to sneak it in. But yeah, so we have our Padlet here, and we have the first column is for if there was anything that stood out to you in the article. We invite you to share a key quote that you may have had or may have come across as you were looking through the Padlet. If you have any questions from the article or video that that came about as you were reading or watching those, we invite you to add those in as well. We'll be referring back to those. But we do have one question to kind of get our conversation started. Um, and so in the article, which is about 3 years old now, uh, what type of emerging voices in the field, or do you see any emerging voices in the field of instructional design that have started to address the disparities that Moore identifies within her article? And so those are one of the things that we'd like to think about and talk about. So I'm just curious if anyone has any experience or they've seen anything that has kind of come about to help you see changes since this article was written about 3 years ago. Any experiences you may have had?
And we certainly welcome, you can either vocalize any thoughts or feel free to use the chat as well, and we'll acknowledge those.
It's the end of the day. Everyone, everyone's tired. I completely understand. Okay, so Lewis is new to the field, so welcome to the field. I will say that I haven't necessarily seen a significant change, but I have noticed that in my courses on instructional design, I'm helping to try to make that change, right? So I'm sharing this story of the danger of a single story, and I'm trying to create ways for new instructional designers who are going to be working in the field to have maybe that more complete picture when they get into the field. And see, Glenna has shared that she hears a lot more talk about this. So there hasn't necessarily seen a lot in the field of instructional design, but humanizing online courses, I think, does come very close. And I think even starting those conversations is where Moore was going with her article. So to see that those conversations are starting to happen, I think can be very powerful. Let's see. Any other thoughts on that?
I think one thing that I would share is elevating voices that are not necessarily always at the forefront or maybe marginalized voices. So it hasn't necessarily been a framework, which I think more is really calling for, like these models like Addy or some of the models that we're really familiar with in instructional design, but elevating marginalized voices to contribute to the field. I'm going to put one link in the chat that I'm really interested in just because it's something I want to be more aware of, is feminist pedagogy in digital spaces. And so one of a connection of mine out of the University of Tennessee, Dr. Romero Hall, is doing a lot of work in this. I think they've got a book coming out, but this online resource I thought was a great point of kind of starting and just getting to understand the different voices that are contributing to instructional design, and ideally maybe a framework to build off of understanding those voices more.
Awesome. Another question we have for you to consider: how does the danger of a single story help us to frame specifically learner analysis within instructional design models? Give you guys a second to kind of think on that. I'll also put it in the chat as well. Yeah, so the learner analysis phase of the instructional design model is where we're typically trying to understand who our target audience is going to be for whatever we're designing. So, say we're designing a course on the road to retirement, our target audience might be, mid-level, mid-level professionals, or it could be brand new professionals, like brand new into their career. And that's who we want to target because we want to help them set up their road to retirement at a young age. It could be that we're working with a group that works with seniors. So we're changing, we might change the way we look at the road to retirement based on who that target audience is. And so in the learner analysis phase, we're really kind of trying to find what situational factors might exist that could influence how we design our course based on their needs. And so thinking about that within the context of that danger of a single story, what are your thoughts about that?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. I think because we approach things with our single story and perspective, I think maybe that kind of I don't know, we force that kind of maybe unconsciously on our design. So I think on our team, for example, any of the classes that we design where it's never done by a single person, right? So that we're constantly holding each other accountable to certain perspectives so that we're not like solely focusing on one limited story. That's, I think, inherently inevitable, but at the same time, not ill-intentioned. It might just be like the default of us trying to um, silo all the knowledge and information we have into like one coherent vision.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think it ties in very nicely to Moore had quoted McDonough, I hope I pronounced that correctly, in her article saying it's not acceptable to just say that wasn't part of our plan. Because like you said, oftentimes, hopefully it is an unconscious bias that might exist that we don't even realize we're doing. So we have to say that we have, that can't be our excuse. We need to find ways to cross check and bring in different perspectives. So I love the way that you shared that. Glenna always also mentioned, that this is a very powerful message. And I've heard this video probably 100 times, and every time I hear it, I take something new away from it. And I think she does she gives some other examples too about children's books and how that influenced how she thought about different categories of people. And so I think it is very humbling to hear those first person accounts. And it does remind us that we do need to ask those critical questions. Who might we be missing in this learner analysis? Whose voice might be missing, or whose needs might not be represented as we're thinking about our learner analysis phase? Yeah, and oftentimes the only way we can really address unconscious biases are really just being aware and being open, like you said, bringing those forward and being open to the fact that they do exist, and that we can learn from them and find ways to be better in our fields, especially in relation to um, the learner analysis phase. Any other last thoughts on that?
I guess one thing I would offer as kind of a side question is, Louis mentioned the value of teams and collaboration in helping us see those biases that we might not see. Are there other strategies that you've used in your discipline in instructional design that have allowed you to kind of unpack those biases?
And that pops right into our next question. What can we do as instructional designers to try to be champions, right, in this field. So yeah, we'd love to hear your input about other ways you're trying to, um, bring in that full, complete picture of your learners.
I think sometimes because human error will always like trump any good intention, like having those really good systems in place to help hold accountable, like a checklist of what types of modalities of learning are available that we can use in here and have we touched on each one, or that accountability piece, you never design alone. What's the process for revising? And it's just, I think, sticking with systems that enable inclusion, and then like checking off the boxes, like, but sometimes it's the figuring out like what are the boxes that need to be checked off, right? Because UDL, like I was a special education teacher for a few years. UDL is very common in special ed. So I was kind of surprised to hear it within the instructional design space as well. I'm not sure how often that's discussed there, but UDL has been a great resource for determining like what domains need to be acknowledged before things go live, right?
Yeah, I love that. And Tyler commented that we love that phrase, you never design alone. I think I might have to steal that from you. I'll give you credit, I promise. But I think that would be something really powerful for my students to be thinking about as well. One of the ways that I have seen this in action is I have making sure that when we're trying to study our target audience, that we know who we're asking. So for an example, I used to work with an engineering company, and they were having a lot of problems with in-use customers not liking their product, right? Because they were designing the product around the project managers who weren't involved on the floor. They weren't involved in the day-to-day operation of the system. And so one of the things I did when they hired me, I came in and I was like, well, where's your end users? Why are they not part of this conversation and how you're designing this system? And the same thing would apply within an instructional design model. So we can't just ask, the one contact we have about the end users. We need to really have multiple perspectives of who those end users are, so that we're making sure we're getting a more complete picture. Let's see. Glenna had a fantastic suggestion about creating characters for her potential target audience, and then putting those in front of her and like thinking about what those characters, how they might experience the different iterations of the course or whatever you might be designing. I love that. That's actually so fun. You are very creative. Let's see, I have some more stuff. Yes, UDL. I'm so glad you mentioned that, Glenna, in the chat, because I think UDL is a key part of the instructional design process. And when I first started teaching a course on instructional design, I inherited it, and it didn't have anything about UDL in it. And I was like, hey, what's happening here? And so I've found ways to kind of build that in and make sure that it's an important part of that ID process. Yes, and especially in higher ed, where are those student voices, and what are we doing to make sure that those student voices are represented within the courses of the faculty that we might be working with? Any other thoughts on taking action or ingraining that into our work as instructional designers?
One thing, just building off of what Glenna just shared. So I've moved into more of a faculty role. I do some instructional design, but now I'm teaching more about instructional design, and having surveys early on to ask about technology familiarity, asking about specific needs, getting more background information about students early on, and being able to anticipate those, because a lot of times we're designing and we don't know who's going to enter our class, especially in an online environment, or designing for someone else. And so at least that, and I've encouraged other instructors to incorporate that, gives me early on in the course some idea of what those unique needs are. So I'm not just making those assumptions as we're going through the course and finding out later on that I wasn't meeting specific needs of learners.
Just quickly add to that, relatedly, once I've had a student from our student system for a class that I was teaching, then I would send out a pre-course survey where I would ask all of those kinds of questions and then questions related to the content. So ahead of time, I could gauge their prior knowledge. So that also helped me in how I formed and went about teaching the course. I found that really valuable to be able to do that. Not always possible, but that was a very helpful approach when I played.
Yeah, I love that, Glenna. I teach at an Institute of Technology, so it's very heavily STEM focused, and that is one of the things that I talk to my students about quite a bit in our course design class, is doing those pre-assessments so that we know what knowledge our students are bringing into the course, and then helping to find ways that if there are any deficits there, that we can find ways to supplement that or help support our students. So that's a fantastic way to kind of learn who those voices are that could be missing otherwise. And I hear a lot of my students talking about the pandemic and how students are coming into class even less prepared than in previous years or prior to the pandemic. So I think it's something that we'll be seeing quite a bit for a while as we trickle through the pandemic babies and K-12 students. I think I captured everything you said, but it was hard to hear you at the very beginning. Did I miss anything else that you were saying?
Erin, I'm not sure if you're talking to me about what I.
Yes, I was just making sure that I didn't miss anything that you had shared, because I didn't hear the first part of what you said, but I think I caught the gist of it. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything else you said that I didn't hit on.
No.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. And then we also had a suggestion about doing some dry runs. So having like a small group kind of review the course that would be representative of your target audience to give you feedback as well. I absolutely love that suggestion. And I've seen that done some, but I don't think it's utilized quite as much as it could be. We're coming up on the end of our 50 minutes, so we wanted to make sure before we left that we didn't just talk about this. Like we said, there's a lot of conversations happening, but what can we really do? And so we'd like to encourage you to take a couple of minutes to think about one action item that you can do after this session to just kind of make sure that when you're thinking about learner analysis in your instructional design phase, that you're finding ways to get that complete story. So we'll give you a minute or two to kind of jot down your action item. And then if you feel comfortable, we'd love to have you share out some ideas that you have. Okay, is there anyone that would feel comfortable sharing the action item that they're going to commit to?
So a commitment to broadening scope of vision to see where there are continued accessibility gaps in your work. That's fantastic.
Love that. Love that. I love that, Glenna, because it is a great teaching tool when we can think about that complete story and how we're telling it, and thinking about our students, our any learners that we may have. So I love that. Are there any others that anyone would like to share, or any questions that anyone has about the article?
David, that's great. Thinking about community impact. So what happens beyond the course? I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely love that too. Because our students don't learn in a vacuum, right? They do learn in a community. And so I think that's a really fantastic action item to really think beyond just the classroom and what that community could look like. Excellent. We only have 2 minutes. So if someone has one more they want to pop in real quick, or a quick question. Otherwise, we thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the article and the video. And we encourage you to always try to find that complete picture and don't fall into the trap of that single story. So thank you so much, everyone.
But as you're heading out, one action item for myself, but feel free to continue this conversation with us, and our contact information is in the chat there.
Yes, absolutely. We would love to continue the conversation.